Welcome, everyone. I've got great panelists with me who are coming to the stage. And I'd like to welcome Deanna MacDonald, who is a co-founder and CEO of Blockchain Labs for Open Collaboration. And she's also a course leader at the MIT, Wharton, and Columbia Business School. Deanna? We've got Chris Bataillard, who is a founder and CEO of Wireless Network Development, an Internet of Things operator rolling out Sigfox Network, and he used to be an investment banker prior. Next one, Sascha Kelterborn, Senior VP, Sales and Marketing for Western Globe of Chinese company Microvast, and he worked successfully in China and Russia before. And last but not least, Timmy Kohler, who works at SUSI Partners, and he's an investor in energy storage. And before that, he was an investment banker at NIBC and Green Tech Capital Advisors. So with this fabulous lineup, we are going to start with something very, very simple. You have probably heard that if you put a blockchain in a title of your company, your stock price goes up by about 10x. And so probably we should start with what is blockchain and what it really means. So I'm going to turn to expert Deanna. Why don't you tell the audience what it is? Why does it double or tentuple the share price of a company that puts it in a name? And how can it be used?
All right, it's quite a loaded question, as there are many versions or definitions of what blockchain is as of late and in the media. It's generally the silver bullet that can solve all problems. But concretely, what we view it as at BLOC, which is my company that works in actually applying blockchain. So the infrastructure is being built in the open source community, and we're looking to actually apply it in the real world in industrial settings. And in that respect, we look at it from just basic 3 core functions. Really, it's a bunch of technologies put together to create the technology called blockchain. But the 3 core functions it has is that it's a distributed and replicated ledger of validated transactions, and those transactions are validated by a protocol or a consensus mechanism on that network, which essentially is a short form for being able to create a chain of custody and traceability of transactions and of information flowing through systems. And in that respect, we're able to utilize it for the first application is Bitcoin, which is running on that same structure, and that's a cryptocurrency. But what we also have is our altcoins, and that's what we've been hearing in the news around how you can create 10x in your company by putting blockchain in the name, and that's the launch of an initial coin offering. That's essentially raising funds, and that's doing so, generally speaking, in an unregulated environment. But that being said, it is different from actually building technology. It's the way in which you would then go about building and actually generate some funds to build. We haven't seen a lot coming out of that space in terms of progress, but actually utilizing and building technology within blockchain is a matter of creating traceability in our supply chains by ensuring that the documentation can be proven throughout the supply chain, for example. Another aspect that we use it for is to timestamp and to put in geolocations of information and exchanges of information and be able to host that in a network where you know it's not going to be tampered with.
So great, Deanna. That's a great start. And we're going to ask Chris to tell us about Internet of Things, just so that we're all on the same page. I think it was in your introduction, so maybe we can quickly describe what that is before we go deep into the topic.
So I stopped telling people I do Internet of Things, which is connecting things, and I tell them now I do sensor networks. The focus of WND is to try to connect very, very small objects to get the information back to the cloud. Information is the power in order to save energy, save costs, save leakage, stealing. And so what we do is we found that probably 50% of the devices that need to be connected in the future are very small, very low cost, very low power devices. And it includes everything from temperature sensor in a field in order to choose what kind of grain you need to use, all the way to monitoring a water meter to see how much has been used during the day and establish not just how much you need to bill, but if there was a leak in the system. And we do this for electricity metering. We do this to monitor batteries, to see how much charge cycle there is in the battery. But we do it at extremely low cost. So our network rollouts have been completely disruptive. The technology we use is also disruptive. The two combined means that we are connecting things for less than $1 a year in cost. So the cost to communicate to that device is somewhere between 60 cents and 90 cents per year to get information on a daily basis back to the cloud. So everyone is looking at big data, because without the data, you can't really do anything. We are just trying to carry that data back from the field to the cloud. And
Great.
we're doing this in Latin America, where we cover, in the last year, the disruption is that in the last year, we already covered 250 million people in just the first deployments of our network. And we're deploying across 11 countries right now, simultaneously.
Great, thank you, Chris. So that's a great introduction to IoT. And now we're going to go to Sascha. Full disclosure, company that Sascha works for, Microvast, IFC is actually a shareholder. We have been partners for about 5 years. And you are the ones who are using this technology. You are using batteries and bringing them from China all over the world. So maybe you can tell us how it plays out, where you have taken your technology, what is your technology, and what are the climate benefits of what you do?
Sure. First of all, we power mobility. This is very important to say. And this battery technology will be, for long run, the future. There will be hybrid technologies. There will be full EV battery technology. Very important is battery technology needs to be safe. I mean, everybody knows battery accidents, fire accidents. We have seen it mostly in the news. We are, so far since founding in 2006, the only battery company which has till today no fire accident with their battery solutions, and we are equipping more than 22,000 buses worldwide. For sure, our market right now is still China, even if we are a US-based holding company, but we are moving forward to Europe, and we are moving forward back to our hometown, to the US. And we are moving forward also towards the automotive industry now, because now we have technology available which gives us the potential and the opportunity to create a safe battery. Safe battery means we have a non-flammable electrolyte which helps to shut down a possible thermal runaway. We have a separator, which is quite technically, which last more than 300 degrees, so you have no thermal runaway again. And we do produce everything on our own. We are the only battery company which is fully vertical integrated. This means electrolyte, anode, cathode material, separator material is all developed by our own. And this gives us the capability really to get the maximum out of the chemistry. And the final product is then a model or a pack solution, which we offer to the final OEMs.
So where are your buses in Europe?
We have more than 1,000 buses running in London. These are hybrid buses. The classical right bus, double-decker buses are all equipped with our battery. We did supply right now more than 100 buses to the Amsterdam region, which is the biggest e-bus fleet. And everything else is upcoming right now because the rest of the buses are mainly running in China and Asia. And the market in Europe is coming now. The market in South America is coming. And probably long run, the market in the US is also coming. So the next big hub for e-mobility will be Europe after China.
So since most of us have been to London, it's probably safe to say that most of us have been in a bus powered by Microvast. That's cool. So let's move to Timmy. Timmy is a financier of energy storage. Timmy, tell us what you've done in battery storage and how you got your head around the riskiness of that sector and how you finance it.
Yeah, happy to do so. So maybe I'll start out with a few words about SUSI Partners, the company that I work for, which was founded in 2009 out of the realizations that climate change is happening, and to combat it, you're going to need a large amount of capital, and there is a niche for a specialized investor in this market. And so in 2009 and 10, SUSI launched the first fund that was focused at the time on renewable energy investments, which was a good time to launch that fund. It's done very well for its investors, and there has been a follow-up fund on this, and SUSI was able to capitalize on that early mover advantage. In 2013, then the next fund was launched for a focus on energy efficiency investments, this time a debt fund, and at the time it was the largest private fund with that focus. And then in 2015, energy storage was launched as a fund, and that is the first dedicated fund for energy storage investments that we certainly know of. And that was launched after conducting a study with the ETH in Zurich and determining that the technology has matured enough and that there is a business case for energy storage to be financed as an infrastructure, as a class. And of course, the pull effect that you have in the market is from the intermittency of renewable energy assets that needs to be bridged somehow to provide supply security. And so just to round that picture off, SUSI employs about 45 professionals in its teams, has done over 65 transactions in its market, and is now moving into Asia and is also launching a global fund. And so when we look at energy storage, this has proven a bit of a challenge. We launched that product about 3 years ago. We've done 2 investments so far. We have a pipeline of about 130 megawatts of near-term opportunities, and the 2 investments that we have done, I can expand a little bit on. Those 2 are located in Canada, in Ontario. They are one is a combination of a large-scale battery, 7 megawatts, 7 megawatt hours, and flywheel system for 5 megawatts. And the other is a facility that we signed with our partner, local partner named NR Store, to deploy up to 120 million Canadian dollars worth of storage systems there to service the local industry. And the way we have managed to do that as an infrastructure investor is we always like to look first at the likelihood of recovering our capital. That is the paramount objective that we have. And in the energy storage space, a lot of the times projects do not have an offtake agreement. If they can take if they can get an offtake agreement, that is a huge bonus. That of course gives you much more certainty around the recovery of your capital. If you don't have said offtake agreement, you have to have a very good understanding of the market that the asset is going to be deployed into, what the drivers are in terms of costs and in terms of revenues, and what you can deduct from that. And of course, there's the other challenges that we are seeing, and I think those are mainly the quality of the counterparties, the novelty of the technologies. So our fund is a technology agnostic fund. We don't only finance batteries, but we have the ability to finance pumped hydro, to finance flywheels, which we've done, to do power to gas, power to heat, to do capacitors, etc. And the more novel the technology is, the more of a yield premium you should be seeing, because you take on additional risks. So then it becomes a question of how strong is the counterparty also.
Yeah. So you're telling us that there is money to be made because there is a yield pickup if you finance it in a market which is underdeveloped, and it's great to see that you've done it twice in Canada already. The tricky one is to see it in emerging markets, and we'd love to see you going to Asia, going to Latin America, going to Africa. So moving on a theme of, continuing on a theme of clean energy, what would be great to hear from Chris and from Sascha. So most of us are looking at a battery. Battery sits in a car. Battery can sit somewhere else. How would you look holistically at the battery storage, and what can you do when you connect a few batteries? What are the opportunities of disruption when you connect a few batteries or many batteries? Chris, you want to get us started?
So we already have clients in Latin America who are connecting batteries, and the reason why they want to connect the batteries is that battery life cycle, as I'm not the best person to explain this, but a battery life cycle is definitely the life of a battery is due to how you treat it, right? In a typical lead acid battery, which is low tech relative to the new stuff, you need acid in the battery. You need to keep the water level in there in order to replenish any losses, and how you cycle the battery up and down will shorten the life. The other thing is that you also need to predict when the batteries need to be changed. So many batteries today are used in backup systems. The whole telecom grid in every single country is backed up with batteries, and probably 30% of the use of lead-acid batteries are that. If you don't manage those, you shorten their lives. You waste electricity, obviously. There's an added dimension to that, is that 30% of the batteries are stolen in Latin America, so you actually want to track them as well as know how they're being used.
So how do you track them, Chris, just for the record? How do you track your batteries?
So
they're quite portable.
In the way that we have small devices that cost single-digit dollars that can monitor the temperature of a battery, the cycle, the electrolytes, but it can also track its location. And it can do it either through GPS, or it can do it just by listening to the Wi-Fi in the room, or in the building, or in the street. And we know within 50 meters where it is. And so we can also put vibration sensors, so we know if they're moved. So if a battery bank, which is on a shelf, is starting to move, you probably have a problem.
So in terms of climate, right, if you connect a bunch of batteries, what is the real impact on possibilities of development of renewables, and what role can setup of batteries play in that space?
So the biggest problem that we have encountered from our clients is that they don't really want to sell batteries. They want to sell a service, because the better you build the battery, the more efficient it is for you to sell it and to sell it as a service. The trouble is it's sometimes difficult to charge upfront for something that is intangible and you can't see. So our customers are actually looking at connecting the batteries so that they can then determine how the battery is being used and charge for its usage, and all the energy and money and technology that they put into the battery can be used in order to reduce the overall lifetime cost of that battery. That's what they're all looking to do. So if you think about it, most industries are trying to transform to goods as a service.
Yeah,
and you
Sascha
cannot
was talking
transform
about it
goods
as well.
as a service without.
You're selling mobility and not selling batteries. So can you tell us a bit more about it? And there's a question here as well. It takes time to recharge. E-bus, is swap and go an option? So maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, perhaps coming back quickly to transfer. Data is very important, so we need to monitor our data, our battery, because only by monitoring the battery exactly we can extend the lifetime. So coming back to the swapping, swap and go is for sure no option, because the contactors will run out quite quickly. It makes no sense. This was the first idea in the beginning phase of e-mobility to swap batteries. This is not workable at the end of the day. An e-bus, to recharge an e-bus with new technology is today possible within 15 to 20 minutes with the right chemistry. Our company especially does fast charging solutions. This means we do recharge our battery up to 100% within 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the data available, depending on the cycle, depending on the road concept, and this is very important. So before, if we talk about e-buses, this means you really need to analyze the road, you need to analyze the usage, you need to analyze in which direction do you want to go. The long-term future is clearly fast charging technology, because you need less battery capacity on the bus, and right now you have two options. You have a slow charging capability and you have a fast charging capability. Since we do not have a set up infrastructure right now in Europe mainly, this makes it quite difficult to do fast charging all over. The leading markets here are the Netherlands, Belgium for fast charging technology, because the infrastructure is already well set up. In Germany we have a big lack. We have more than 14,000 gas stations in Germany, but only 2,000 fast charging stations. So there's a lot of support needed at the end of the day, and data needed in order to convince the government, to convince the European Union really to invest into the infrastructure. Only when we invest into infrastructure, especially for fast charging points, then we will really move the e-mobility forward.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of data, Deanna, what can blockchain do to facilitate data? And what can blockchain do to improve basic infrastructure in cities? Because we hear a lot about electric buses, electric vehicles, but unless you really change the supporting infrastructure, you're not going to get the benefits. So what can blockchain do to bring the data into the space and create opportunities?
Well, there's a couple elements. I think it's a baseline for a lot of what you guys are talking about here. How do we connect these sensors to the larger kind of network of things, for example, and how do we ensure that that's secure, for one? And secondly, what types of microtransactions would enable these the charging and the paying for the charging off of the city grid, for example, the qualification of the carbon offsets, for example, generated as a result of utilizing these technologies. First and foremost, I think it's an underpinning technology that is only enabled by sensors and furthermore by the data itself that we collect. But in that respect, it's also how we store that data and where we decide we, as a city or as a nation or as a global community, store that data. Because as it stands, blockchain isn't actually where you store anything right now. Right now, it's just a matter of transactions being validated. Those transactions are stored in the network, Bitcoin network, but you're not storing data in large volumes of it. That at our current calculation is probably about $100,000 a gigabyte to store data. So we also look into that type of distributed ledger technology for that. And what that means is essentially using cloud services and servers around the world to store this data to make sure that it's cyber secure. Because first and foremost, our critical infrastructure is not cyber secure around the world, and we've been seeing that, and neither are our sensors or devices. So how do we actually secure that information flow and ensure that it can't be tampered with? And I think that's a very important role that blockchain
So we're going to call on our buzzmaster, and we're going to ask you to take out your phones. Michael, why don't we look at security of data? Have you ever been hacked?
And the answer possibilities are definitely, probably, no idea, and I'm not telling you, which is basically a yes.
Okay. Probably. Nobody has ever been hacked.
Yeah,
look at that.
There's also no is not an option. You know,
no is really not an option,
it's
right?
Not, I mean, it really isn't.
Okay, Deanna. Okay, I think you've got your future secured here.
Yeah, that's solid. Solid stats.
Can you fix that?
Hopefully. I mean, we actually deploy a lot of different domains within BLOC, and one of our experts is a cybersecurity analyst. But we also are working with Interpol on how we can actually create a cyber secure network to plug our sensors and our data into. So hopefully we can. It's within this purview of blockchain, but it's not directly blockchain. It's actually the system that we need to plug blockchain into.
Yeah. So over 50, 60%, close to 60% have either definitely or probably been hacked. And well, a few people are not telling us, so that's your additional 5%, 2%. Well, okay, security of data, security of infrastructure. That's very interesting. We're going to spend a couple more minutes on the clean energy. So, Sascha, what is hindering advanced energy storage, advanced battery storage? What are the things that need to be fixed, from basic chemistry to finance to regulation? What is it that would make a difference?
I think the chemistry is available to really boost e-mobility. So the chemistry, we have new development ongoing, which gives us the ability of having 270, 300, and 350 kilogram on cell level available quite soon. This means high energy batteries with long cycle lives. So they will come out on the market on SOP probably around between 2020 and 2025. So this means these kind of batteries gives you the chance to use your car the same way as you would use a gasoline car. The biggest problematic is the missing regulation. So, and also the missing availability of an EV car. So there are no cars available besides, not making any, besides one American brand who is quite successful in a way. But this battery is not safe. A lot of people, they just want to jump on their car. They want to, if they have to get gas, they want to get gas within 10 to 15 minutes. So this is one topic. They want to have the flexibility not to look after charging stations. So as soon as we reach with a battery development which is available, fast charging technology, you can recharge your car within 10 to 15 minutes. You can run 500 to 800 kilometers with your car. Then this will boost the market. But very important is that the European Union and the governmental side, they have to do quite a lot, especially on the regulation side, because we need more infrastructure charging points. And we need one system one credit card system to pay. So you cannot run around like if you take a city of Dortmund, you have 30 different charging points, you have 30 different credit cards in order to pay your electricity. That makes no sense for your car. So you need to have one common system, one joint system, which you can use all over Europe. Then this topic will work. And what is the other problem? Right now, open words, we don't have enough electricity available. If we would make the switch from gasoline cars or in general from combustion engines towards e-mobility, the grid is not big enough, the electricity is not available, if you take as an example Germany or all over Europe. Because we made this quick switch going more to green energy. Now we have to find out how can we get enough electricity out of that green energy in order to really do the full switch to full e-mobility.
Deanna, you were nodding about regulation. What kind of regulation do we need, both in Europe and in emerging markets?
Well, that's actually the biggest contention point in general with all of us in terms of strong environmental regulation that incentivizes and furthermore creates the enforcement mechanisms for us to adopt new types of energy sources. And I think we also need regulation in terms of exactly like when with that brand in America updating their cars overnight in a digital space, and then suddenly we have driverless cars, and that is obviously outside of the scope of regulation. And how do regulatory bodies keep up with such fast-paced disruption? So in one respect, we are far behind, and in blockchain space particularly, it's very behind because we are outpacing traditional institutional investment right now with new crowdfunding models, and we're also transacting monetary value with each other without being taxed. So we have a lot of regulatory issues that have to be addressed, but I think first and foremost, our environmental regulations are a good driver for creating new technologies within this space, and that's what we use within our markets to create that urgency to switch over to new fuels or to the right types of technologies. But I think as well, your point's super valid as to the transaction system that underpins all of this. If we have a multitude of credit cards or operators and payment channels, we're never going to get anywhere, which is a good example of the use of, for example, Bitcoin network in that, because it is digital by nature, it's decentralized, and it supports that type of infrastructure and creates that microtransaction automatically between two smartphones or between two charging stations, for example.
You mentioned autonomous vehicles, so we're going to jump a little bit outside of the topic, and we're going to put a question up there. We'd love to hear from the audience by when you expect autonomous vehicles to be on the road in Europe.
Yeah, there's a little period there that shouldn't be there, but it's there. So between 2020 or 2050, I should have turned those numbers around, but by 2035, it looks like 34.
Okay, we're going 2034. So, panel, what do you think? Sascha, we're going to start with you. You are in e-mobility.
Autonomous driving, I mean, the first step we already did. So, I mean, we have already cars available with up to 70 miles an hour, which you can almost drive autonomous. More or less, you have just to put your hands back on the steering wheel. The real autonomous driving will start in Industry 4.0, in interlogistic topics, in harbor areas, in closed areas. Because the biggest problem for autonomous driving nowadays is more or less the law aspect in general. What happens if an accident happens and the car has to come to a decision, either I hit an old lady or a young girl, and there's no way around that this accident, I cannot stop that accident, it will happen. So whose fault is it? Is it the fault of the driver? Is it the fault of the car, of the OEM? Is it a fault of the software developer? So these kind of things have to be clearly answered by the European Union. And so how do you deal with that?
So aside from ethical questions, which obviously are very difficult, what is your estimate of how many cars, what proportion of cars can get off-road if we have automated driving and therefore shared mobility? Are we talking 5% less cars on the road, 20% less cars on the road? More?
It's difficult to say.
Difficult
you
to
will
say?
have, for sure, more e-mobility services, means you will have autonomous taxis running around. So you will have more shared services where people will share a car.
Which means they'll own less cars.
Autonomous minibus driving. So especially in inner city areas, this will happen quite a lot. So you can even see today the tendency that young people will not go into will not make any driver license anymore, especially when they're living in a big city. So as soon as you set up the urban transport system in the right way, and Germany is quite advanced in this case, and you will find more autonomous driving in these big cities. So you will have less cars on the road. But I don't know how it will be on the countryside, because the people they need a car, they need mobility.
Right.
So it's a difficult question. It's difficult to answer.
Chris, Deanna, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the cities, we don't need to wait until 2030.
Yes.
Okay, so what's your estimate? When are we going to be there?
We're deploying in cities parking sensors, and the statistics show us that 30 to 40% of the traffic downtown metropolitan areas are people looking for parking spaces. So they're just running around the block looking for a space. So all the cities are interested in putting IoT devices in order to put one in each parking space. First of all, it helps them regulate, so they know if the car's been there longer than they're allowed to, and send somebody to give a ticket if it has. But the main thing is that they want to be able to connect it to everybody's smartphones and tell them where the parking space is, so when they go to an address, it'll direct them directly to the empty space. And they won't be riding around the block, creating 30% more traffic.
30% of traffic.
That's the estimate that we've heard in many of the cities.
That is amazing, because climate benefits of that are just stunning.
Actually,
Deanna.
it must be true, because when we install our antennas in Bogota, we don't send the guys out with a truck. They take a taxi. Because finding a space takes them an extra hour.
Incredible, incredible. Deanna, any thoughts on that? What can blockchain do for that?
Well, I think in many ways we have, it's interesting to think about how in that circumstance we would be able to limit traffic, for example, and how can we incentivize that limiting of traffic, and how can we better create a system where people are wanting to plug into something and share in the autonomous vehicle. And I think those are, again, a qualification of transactions that we could benefit from having a common transaction system to do that upon. So I think blockchain would be there. And just as a follow-up and fun anecdote, I work a lot with the city of Copenhagen, and they have a new kind of EXO organization called Copenhagen Solutions Lab that worked on that exact problem. But they use this lab inside of the city to test these types of sensors, because apparently on the European level, about 4 or 5 countries ordered en masse the exact sensors to test for parking spaces, but they didn't have a 360 angle. So they all spent hundreds of thousands of euros each just getting these sensors and installing them when not having tested them in any capacity. And then Copenhagen Solutions Lab has this under the bridge cool kind of lab testing area where they actually identified that they wouldn't work in the city space, so they avoided having to buy them. And I think that's an important part about the procurement of these technologies as well, and how we're implementing them in the city space, and why we're doing that, and what are the needs we're addressing, and in functionality as well. How do they work?
So back to you, Chris. We talked about regulation, and you have done some work in emerging markets already in Latin America. What were the pieces of regulation that helped you or hindered you from developing your business further?
You know, normally when you're doing wireless networks, it's always an uphill struggle in order to get things done, because people see it as a cash cow, because so many of the cellular operators paid so much money for it. I think when we arrived in Brazil 2 years ago to start the project, we had open door policy with the whole government, and we today have open door policy. The governments are so intent on trying to change both the cities and the rural areas, agriculture, etc., that whenever we need something, they've actually given it to us. The regulation in Brazil was very friendly for us from the start, but you never know if it's going to change. We saw in some of the earlier panels that people are afraid that the regulation will change over time. So
people were actually calling for more regulation in some of the panels.
Right. Yeah. More regulation on some side, but predictability is also important, because when you invest on a 10 or 15-year basis, if you don't have predictability, you can't get your money back.
And what's your experience so far in Latin America?
And so far in Latin America, I mean, I've spent part of my career fighting regulators to get things changed. And in Latin America, they were chasing me to ask me what I wanted. So it was a very nice nice difference. I mean, I landed in Argentina when the government changed, and Argentina had no proper regulation for us to operate. We were talking to potential financial partners, and the regulator found out which hotel we were staying at, and were chasing us for meetings, and they changed the regulation so that we could operate.
That's unbelievable. So, Timmy, this is a task for you. You are now going to the emerging markets. What do you take out of this conversation? What are you going to be looking for to replicate your success in Canada and taking it to emerging markets?
Well, I think in emerging markets, you have a whole different opportunity set when it comes to stationary energy storage, and in terms of the challenges that the grids have there, and the value add that you can see from energy storage. If you, for example, if you pair storage with solar PV or with other renewable generation assets, you can electrify a lot of communities that aren't electrified, for example, or in fringe of grid situations. Let's say in a mining situation, you can replace diesel, and so we see a lot of potential value there. I think the challenges that we see there are typical challenges for emerging market investors in counterparty risks, certainty of regulation, financial risks, and I think we're seeing a lot of potential deployments there, and it's increasing. So that's something we want to capitalize on, of course. But it's tough for an ordinary financial investor to go into the emerging markets, and so it's always helpful to have some form of support from an organization that does this, right?
Mm-hmm. You have had success in Canada, so hopefully without layering of risks, you can actually take it forward to the emerging markets. So we're going to change the topic a little bit. We'll go to questions later. We're going to move from clean energy to other areas where these technologies can be applied, because climate is not just about clean energy and smart cities. It is also about green buildings, about energy efficiency, about climate-smart land management, and climate-smart supply chains. So we're going to take it to supply chains for a moment, and we're going to start with you, Deanna. Tell us, how can blockchain be used in managing supply chains? And maybe you can give us an example from one of the commodities, soft commodities, and see how that can be managed.
Yeah, absolutely. We work well within this scope, actually, both in the agricultural setting and as well in the maritime sector. And that is to say that we are transporting, moving, exchanging goods and soft commodities across global trade. And how do we then secure that? And how do we create the traceability within that? There's a lot of corruption that exists, of course, within being able to get away with not having registered something that you're exchanging, or furthermore for falsifying the records as to where it came from. So normally we rely on certification bodies to tell us that this product has been sustainably sourced and has been delivered as according to its specifications. That being said, where is that scope? How are they knowing that information? As far as it goes, standardized bodies kind of come in and check and then say, yes, it's here, but there isn't really any accountability in this system. So we use sensors to enable us to be able to track via, for example, RFID tagging of a good, let's say, cocoa beans. So we know that where they came from because we've geo-stamped their location when they were done, or when they were created, for example, by a supplier, the origin of source. And then we hash that to the blockchain, which simply just means we create a record that can't be changed, and we have a record that it exists here, and here are the specifications of it. From there, that sensor would enable us to see where it's being transacted and traded along the supply chain. And as someone adds information to that, we would be able to then add that to the original source of information. So what you'd have in the end, as it's transacted along the supply chain, is an actual record and a chain of custody associated with that product, which will tell you everything from its origin, who supplied it, and what quality it was supplied in, to if it was mixed with any other products and how that entailed. And lastly, as well, to at what point was it exchanged and who had touched it along the way. So if there is any discrepancies or any changes to these products, you're able to pinpoint exactly where that happened. But you're also allowing for consumers to create the accountability in our supply chains that we've not been able to do so far. We can trust in certified bodies or certifications on our products, but we don't necessarily know, as many scandals have shown, that they are truly traceable. So there's that aspect. And then secondly, there's interesting aspects on the financial side of trade finance on that, because if you're able to qualify a supplier and they didn't have to have an economy of scale to do so, you've created a good identity system in this in the blockchain, for example, then you're able to see as someone ordering a product that you prefer that supplier, and they can actually create global business based on that because they're a qualified supplier with a good reputation as according to this system of blockchain, which creates that reputation and the traceability. So that history will be very, very important going forward in creating cool market mechanisms or future payment obligations, for example, financing the exchange of goods if they have this type of blockchain certification or traceability in it.
So you just scared all the commodity trade finance bankers in the audience because you're basically taking them out of business because commodity trade finance is a chain of trust and you will be taking them out of business. This is not good, right?
Yeah, and that's the truly disruptive aspect, right? It's the disintermediation that occurs when you're able to reorganize global value chains and supply chains. And when you do that, because as it stands, all of these intermediaries are taking a cut of the profits along the way to basically be a broker of trust. And if you're able to transfer that trust to this system, and we can only trust it if we decide to trust it ourselves. So if we know what the inputs of the data are and that we trust where it's coming from. And if we trust that system when we no longer need these brokers, exactly, we will be disintermediating billion-dollar industries, multi-billion-dollar industries that are literally their business model is to do exactly that. But that's why I think it's going to be very influential and powerful for the emerging markets, because suddenly you have suppliers that have the ability to participate in a market without an intermediary negotiating on their behalf.
You also disintermediate some of the certification providers for sure, because if we're talking about that famous cocoa bean and your chocolate will have a tag of where it came from, you will have a number of certification schemes that are going to be upset.
True, but I think we also tried to figure out who could be a validator in this system as well. And in this circumstance, it actually could be a decision information system for certification bodies. So they could still have very much a role in certifying it because they know the information now can be trusted, and it actually would help their brand and furthermore allow them to make claim with certainty. So I think in many ways it could actually leverage and benefit certification bodies, but they would have to be a part of this system as well. And they could be validating certain aspects, such as where the supply comes from.
So we're moving on to disruption, sort of higher-level disruption. So Chris, what does disruption look like for you?
Well, since we're talking about distribution, and certification, we have discussions all the time. And I had a discussion personally with one of the biggest food retailers in Brazil, and what they were interested in is monitoring refrigerators. Because that's the biggest use of electricity in food distribution. And you need to keep the temperature low enough so the food doesn't spoil, because actually I saw some other statistics from a think tank, 30% of all food never makes it to the person's mouth, right? It's destroyed in the process of either distribution or some of it in your fridge. But so they were very intent on doing that because they need to keep the temperature down below a certain level. But if they keep it too low, they're just wasting a lot of energy. So they're monitoring, some groups are monitoring hundreds of thousands of fridges in order to do that, and it's clear. But the interesting thing is at the end of the conversation, the guy said, "Do you track cows?" And I said, "You don't sell cows in a supermarket, so why are you so interested in tracking cows?" He says, and we have a business end to look at cow tracking, but mainly for theft. So I was curious as to why he wanted to track the cows. He said, because we want to know where the cow grew up and whether the meat that we're buying actually is from where we say we're buying it.
You don't want to have it from a deforested
And we want to see its
Amazon.
life, how it traveled, where it lived, where it moved. And I think with blockchain and certifying those records, it's very difficult to recreate a trail of a huge amount of data that's falsified. And then you can tell exactly. There are in the first 4 countries that we're doing, we have 350 million cows. Right.
So one of the users, Charles, is telling us that they already track cows in the Netherlands. Smart cow, true. So
and in Netherlands, I'm sure that if the cow's lost, you can probably find it. But in Argentina, the cow could go wandering 100 kilometers and you wouldn't know where it is.
In Brazil, there is a selective tracking of cows as well. Okay, disruption for you, Sascha. What does that look like?
technology, for me, will change the world. One part will be e-mobility, battery technology. But we need to do that in the right way. It needs to be monitored. It needs to be carefully analyzed. Data is very important to move this technology ahead. And what is very important, we can learn actually, and I don't say that very often, but we can learn in that case, especially in e-mobility, from China. Because China just made the decisions due through air pollution. We want to have e-mobility, and we want to have battery cars in place, and we want to have that changed by a certain date. So, and this puts so many people under pressure to deliver, which actually helps to climate change in that case. So, and these things we should really take back to Europe and all the other emerging markets and say, let's take a look at their business concept and their business model. Let's see how we can adapt it to ours and really move it forward. So we don't need to make the same mistakes again, what already happened. And this will save a lot of energy and resources. And this is this actually at the end of the day is very important. And with the right technology in hand, a combination out of different technologies will help us really to move ahead.
Let's move on to disruption in finance. So what we, those of us who are in finance, struggle with is verification and certification of a use of proceeds, especially in green bonds and other forms of green financing. And it would be great to hear how you, Timmy, look at disruption in finance in terms of tracking use of proceeds, maybe not necessarily in your fund, but more in general. And it would be great to hear from Deanna, what can blockchain do in terms of use of proceeds tracking in finance? Timmy?
Well, I think that's a very interesting topic. It's one that SUSI has taken an extensive look at and has also conducted a study on blockchain. I'm unfortunately not the expert on that topic, but what I can talk about is I think the disruption that we've been seeing in the products that we run, which is of course renewables, efficiency, and storage. And renewables has started a huge disruption in the utilities industry that is ongoing and that is only just evolving now with the incorporation of storage and we see that continuing of course to a massive extent potentially in the future in the energy markets generally and I think it goes hand in hand with e-mobility and this whole topic is going to change everything in that area.
So a couple of things for Deanna. So what can we do to track use of proceeds? And also we have a question on adaptation. What can blockchain do in terms of adaptation, climate adaptation projects?
For the tracking of the proceeds, I think we can still build on the earlier example with the supply chain traceability as well. So if we have a certified and verified record and chain of custody on a product, likewise, we could do the same for funds. So how do we document the funds have been received? One, how do we document that the solar panels have been built? Two, how do we then document that they're up and running? Three, are the meters connected to the devices? If answered correct, if all is yes, then we now actually have traceability on these funds.
Yeah, so give us an example. A bank wants to finance a solar farm and wants to use that solar farm as a backup for their green bond, which they just issued. How would that look like in your world?
We actually did a really great feasibility study on that together with a few in the audience here, working on exactly how we could utilize green bonds for grid infrastructure investment and how we can create traceability within that. Furthermore, how we could use this technology to actually give the ROI back and the return on dividends because we have a currency that we can actually do that with. And what in the end we end up having is a very enclosed system, a holistic system that's able to, one, that you have the financing actually done within the system. If you transfer this in Bitcoin, it goes directly to the account itself. Two, that then we have verified the information that it has been spent or that it's been spent on specific things. So you can actually lock in within cryptocurrency what the money is spent on and the timeline in which it's spent. And finally, then after it's spent and there starts to be a generation of revenue or electricity, you can then bring that back and subsidize it into the system. And that goes with, I think, three of the questions here I can sum up in one quick answer with, which is what we work on, which is carbon offsets and how to translate those offsets to targets. And that's a super interesting area in which we have to, on every level with kilowatt hours or fuel, the biofuels have to be able to convert that to carbon offsets. And then we have to be able to take that carbon offset and understand how much it contributes to a local goal, to a national goal, and then to a global goal. And we're actually working on doing that because the best system to do that within is a token. We don't use tokens right now, we're using coins, and those coins don't really represent anything of physical value. But if we actually were to tokenize a physical asset, and we were able to prove through the use of sensors and through the use of verified information chains, then we're able to say, this solar panel produced this much carbon offset this year, we sold those carbon offsets on the market for this much, it was sent back to the consumer, that helps to subsidize their retrofitting, for example. They're compliant, and that also contributed to the goal of this city's reduction in carbon, and furthermore to the SDG number 14. So we're able to actually bring that all through the system with this traceability mechanism of actually creating it from the beginning to the end and tracing.
So how scalable is that? Because we have a question here on scalability, and I think David is telling us that it may not be as scalable as we think about it, and that it's more about trust. So how do you balance scalability? Is it scalable, and is that offset by trust?
Well, it's a bit of a multifaceted question because there isn't just one blockchain. That's the first good basis to come from. There's many competing blockchains right now, and not all blockchains are created equal or the same. Within the system of Bitcoin, it is the massive energy consumption system that we're talking about here, and that's because they've actually, to validate a transaction, you have to commit computing resources to do so, and that's where we're taking a lot of the energy off the grid. But that's for cryptocurrency. Whereas if we would be working on another system that is an open source system called Hyperledger, for example, that's based on staking some money instead of computing power. And likewise, we're seeing new protocols that are really interesting about staking your reputation. So if you're a certification body, as we mentioned earlier, I certify that this information is true and I put my name on that. And I do that instead of dedicating computational resources. So we will find new ways forward, and scalability is a part of that. So we're really just in emerging days right now. This is an emerging technology through and through, and we're still building the infrastructure. So it will be how we define that, and it will be how we learn these lessons from the first iteration of creating a massive energy black hole that we've done so far. So
thank you for bringing the cost of energy and use of energy into the room, because there were a couple of questions prior on the board for that. So we're going to take a small break, and we're going to ask you a question. You have heard about several technologies and what they can do for climate. So Michael, why don't you give us a couple of choices?
Here it is. Which disruptive tech is most likely to positively impact climate change? Blockchain, energy storage, off-grid solar, or the Internet of Things?
Okay. Panelists, what do you think? Sascha, what do you think? Why don't we start with you? This is your stuff, right?
That's my business. I think energy storage will change quite a lot the climate in general.
Okay.
We just need to control it in the right way. So, I mean, if we produce batteries are not always clean. We need to be very straight about that. So we need hydropower as an example. We need nuclear power or an efficient solar power. Really, a lot of solar power.
Will it ever be a workable solution? There we go.
Then it will work. Then this battery will be 100% clean. Best example is take now a German car manufacturer from the south who is producing part of their e-mobility cars already by using electricity from hydropower electricity. So, and if you move on and it takes a full value change, then you will say, okay, all my components for that car need to be produced with clean energy. Then this will work, and then this will be the cleanest possibility to move ahead and to change the climate. Mm-hmm. But this will not be done in a day. This is impossible. We need to have the right grid available. We need to have the right data stream available. We need to monitor all these kind of things. So this is not. This needs time. Probably.
So what I'm hearing from you is sort of interoperability of infrastructure assets. Chris, Deanna, any thoughts on that?
Exactly my thoughts.
Yeah. Okay, what do we need?
Interoperability, and
they have to play together
category, well. Yeah, I think the fifth category should be all of the above used together.
Yeah. We forgot to put that in.
Simply put.
Will be a combination.
Yeah,
Chris,
I think I probably didn't make a good argument.
Internet of Things is quite high
I hit
as well.
15% or something like that.
Right.
But if you look, I can just go through the numbers. 40% of the electricity is lost in the grid, right?
40%.
40% is lost in the grid. In LATAM, some cities, 40%, another 40% of what's of the 60% is lost in the distribution. And it's lost in the distribution because somebody disconnected the electric meter or bypassed it, right? And therefore, their consumption doesn't have any cost, and they can do what they want. So you know, IoT is used in order to monitor fraud and monitor usage. That's also true for gas. It's also true for water. It's also true for assets that disappear. And if you look at it, you know, we keep talking about logistics in Europe for efficiency, but in LATAM, we actually talk about asset recovery, right? The asset goes for a walk and it needs to come back. So we need to know where it is. I see that, you know, how do you ensure that sensors are not being tampered with or whatever? You know, the sensors are logging in, so we know where they are, right? It depends on the precision that we want to put on it. So we can know if they've been tampered. We can know if they're not in the right location. So if you're telling me that the battery is being charged and discharged in Mato Grosso in Brazil, and the sensor is actually in Buenos Aires, there's a disconnect into what information is being given to me, right? So
do you go and retrieve that sensor?
Sorry?
Do you go and retrieve that sensor?
We can shut it down and disregard it.
Shut it down.
You know, the cost of retrieving a sensor, to give people ideas of the cost here, we're talking about costs of sensors that are single-digit dollars. The cost of retrieving a sensor is $50 to $100. It's a lot cheaper just to get rid of it.
Shut it off.
Shut it down and just disregard it. We can also shut them down remotely so that they don't even create any radio noise. So the idea is that the sensors will be ubiquitous. They will go in everything. I mean, we're talking to people in Asia who want to put sensors in the monitors of computers and TVs in order to know where they're used, how much they're used, how much energy they're consuming, and whether when they return to the manufacturer with a fault, whether it's because they were abused or it was actually a design flaw. Right?
Excellent. So we've got about 3 minutes left, and all of you are at the forefront of various new technologies and financing those new technologies in case of Timmy. So I'd like to ask you one question. What would you like this audience to have from this session? If there was one thing they need to remember from all of you, what would that be? Timmy.
Well, I think we're all very, very excited about what we're seeing here and the changes and the disruption. I think one thing that we've encountered in financing these assets is an expectation that the principles of finance itself are going to be disrupted as well, and that is certainly not the case. And I think the market for energy storage is really waking up to that. That you know the principles of good finance are still very valid and need to be adhered to. Even when looking at these exciting new technologies and opportunities, and that's what we're seeing now.
So good finance principles to continue. Sascha.
In general, most important thing is disruptive technology will change the world. Mobility, battery technology will change the world. You will have a totally different sense of mobility in the combination with data services and connection services. The people do have to be open for that, and they really have to take that challenge, and it will help in general the society to come to a new climate and to come to a new working environment in total.
Batteries will change the world, and keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Chris.
For me, the disruption is to reduce the cost of collecting the information to the point where it has huge value. If it costs you $1.50 to collect information that's going to save you $1, it doesn't look like a very good financial transaction for anybody. But if it costs you 5 cents to save $1, it starts to be extremely interesting. And that's what we're seeing right now. We see a complete disruption and a price break in the cost of collecting that information. The value of that information is staying stable. But the cost of collecting that information is dropping down to 1/10 or 1/20 of what it used to cost, the total cost.
So potential profit delta between cost of information and...
Basically what we're seeing is we're seeing about a 10x return for the total solution, not just what we provide, but the total solution of software, hardware, and connectivity. Most of our clients are seeing a 10x return on their investment, whether it be in agriculture with smart agriculture, batteries, or metering. Right? Or refrigerators.
Deanna, last word to you.
For me, I think disruption is it's a slippery slope. I don't necessarily think we should threaten people to change. I think there is actually a business case in doing so. And as a result, what are we interested in with technology? Are we interested in replicating our current existing systems, or are we interested in truly transforming our systems now and our global economy? And in that sense, I think that would encompass what disruption would mean for me is true transformation negotiated by us as a society to address the needs that we have. And in that respect, it's not just technology, it's all of us to be redefining our roles, to find these new business models, and to furthermore, to really define concretely what our needs are and what our goals are as a society before we blindly apply technology.
So it's not disruption for the sake of disruption and technology for the sake of technology, but both for the sake of making the world a better place. With this, a big thank you to this excellent panel. Thank you for joining me today. Thanks.
Thank you.